you enjoying the program at home. Today's program is the kickoff to our Building Humanist community season. We're so glad to have you all here as we are almost complete in our years-long process of renovating our home, the building we're in right now. As we invite everyone to take a look during a coffee hour after the program, as well as during other community events and programs scheduled throughout the season, we also continue to connect with each other and what we hold as important for ourselves, our families, and the world we live in. Many times, our moderator will start with a quote about humanism itself, but today, I would like to read from our mission statement. Our mission is to create a supportive and inclusive humanist community that inspires all to be their best selves, sustains us through life's milestones with celebrations, memorials, and festivals, respects science, art, and nature, promotes critical thinking and rational ways to solve human problems, and creates opportunities to take action to bring about a better world for all. As I mentioned, we're kicking off our season of Building Humanist Community, and we're honored that Drew Bekius is here as the first of a fantastic array of speakers this fall who will touch upon topics that cover a wide variety of things such as arts, current events, science, and more. Drew is a humanist speaker, writer, and coach based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He is the author of The Rise and Fall of Faith and Your Next Life Now. After launching an award-winning ministry at the age of 16, Drew went on to pick up a couple theological degrees and pastored 2 churches for a total of 12 years. After his own deconversion, Drew served as president of the Clergy Project, providing peer support, community resourcing, and career transition assistance to deconverted religious leaders in over 35 countries around the world. He is an energy-forward values alignment coach who currently serves on staff as lead speaker coach for TEDx Minneapolis and on the board of the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the non-theistic religious community where back in 1917, a minister named John Dietrich kickstarted the controversial new movement that he called Humanism. Drew speaks and does workshops with various humanist communities around the United States as he strives to help folks more fully embrace and live out progressive humanist values. Drew has a Master's of Divinity from Moody Theological Seminary, a Bachelor of Arts in Pastoral Studies from Moody Bible Institute, personal and business coaching certificates from Life Purpose Institute, and a Humanist Celebrant endorsement from the Humanist Society. He's a member of the American Humanist Association, Freedom from Religion Foundation, Unitarian Universalist Association, and the Loft Literary Center, among others. He's also just a fantastic friend to have at brunch if you're ever, get the chance. Yes, thank you. Without further ado, here is Drew Bekius.
Well, thank you, Glenda, and thank you, everyone. It really is an exciting joy, I think we could say, to be back here with you all. I was last here about 5 years ago, and it was so exciting to see all the renovations that have taken place. Last night we had this incredible event. Who was here for the event last night? Yeah, most of us, the vast majority. Absolutely amazing. Love what you've done with the place in the 5 years since I've been away. But no, really good stuff. So thank you for having me. And here we go. So I suppose it was one evening, roughly a decade ago, when I found myself with a few friends at a local Chicago bar of all cities after a long day's work. At the time, I was living here in Chicago. And as the evening wore on after that long day's work with my friends in this local bar, as the evening wore on, there came a point where I looked up from the table where we were seated, looked across the dance floor, and that's when it happened. That's when my eyes connected with hers. Now, at this point, it had been only 2 years since I had left the church, just 2 years since I had left my career as lead pastor of a growing suburban Chicago church, and even less than those 2 years since I had eventually come to come to the grips with the fact that, yes, I had indeed become an atheist, and even less than that since the divorce from my high school sweetheart of 16 years. All of this to say, in quite short order, quite a short amount of time, my life had been completely flipped upside down, as the cliche would say. And now here I was trying to navigate this whole new world around me, trying to figure out, what does life look like on the other side of faith? How does this newfound world function once God is gone and dogma removed? And a big part of this for me and for my journey was exploring, discovering, embracing, for the very first time, my autonomy. Literally, for the very first time in my life, so it seemed, trying to figure out, how do I simply live? And how do I enjoy life without needlessly, constantly fretting and worrying over whether or not I was daily sacrificing enough of my own desires and preferences for God's and everyone else's? And a big part of this, within all of life's many layers and complexities, yes, this also included my dating life, right there in that Chicago bar. Now, I must stop for a moment. I'm not sure how many of our talks typically start off with a hookup story, or of those, how many are invited back, but stay with me, and I promise to keep it PG, all right? But so basically, I found myself in a bar that night where I was interested in someone, and as the evening wore on, it became clear that that interest was mutual, and eventually, we made it a few blocks down the street back to her place, and, well, I'll let you fill in the proverbial gaps from there. Fast forward to the next morning, and I did what I'd simply assumed everyone does in the real world. I did what I'd seen illustrated in dozens, if not hundreds, of sitcoms and popcorn flicks over my decades-long cinema viewing experience. I quietly gathered what few things I'd brought with me the night before, and I discreetly slipped out the door without leaving even so much as a note behind. Yeah, that asshole. Yeah. At the time, I was blogging regularly, weekly, about my deconversion experience, on a wide variety of topics and subjects intersecting with my journey both into and out of faith, many of which stories would later make it into one of my books, The Rise and Fall of Faith. And my newfound nameless friend from the night before, well, she went ahead and, after discovering my blog, went ahead that day and posted a comment, a very public comment on a very public blog. And the comment went something like this, again, the PG version. She said, "I want to see a blog post about how easily you'll go home with someone, only to disappear the next morning because you think you're too cool to be bothered so much as to leave even a note behind." And it may have been peppered with a long list of expletives, the less than complimentary kind. Now, I tell you, folks and family, that hit me hard. It devastated me. Knowing that without even realizing it, I had so clearly hurt someone, offended someone that, quite honestly, rather enjoyed my time with. And it served, in this moment, I had two realizations. One was that despite all of my research in sitcoms and popcorn flicks, apparently this isn't how you treat people in this newfound real world. At least not if you want to be a decent human being. But then secondly, it served as a focal point for me to ask this question: how do I practice my autonomy without treating everyone around me like garbage? How do these two top-tier values, that of personal freedom and also of respect for others, how do these two values meet in the middle? How do they interact with one another? How do they at various times give way to one another? What does that look like? I'd like us to take some time, I'd invite us to take some time this morning to think about and consider our values, especially as we're stepping forward into this new chapter of building community and building this pathway forward for EHS, for the ethical humanist society. How do our values play a role, specifically our humanist values? And how might these values help each of us individually and collectively? How might these values help us build a more intentional humanist lifestyle with greater impact on the world around us? What might that look like? Now, as Glenda alluded to, I suppose you could say I've been preaching values for the last 20 years. First as an evangelical minister, albeit one who was increasingly on the more progressive side of things. Go ahead and raise your hand if progressive evangelical sounds like an absolute oxymoron. Yeah. Well, we were on what was referred to at the time as the evangelical left. All right? Or maybe if that's not a term we're familiar with, I'm not even sure evangelical leftism is a thing anymore. But maybe we've heard of the emerging church. Okay, well, that was us. That was me, if that helps at all. But eventually, nonetheless, alas, like so many of the rest of us here in the room, I eventually left the church, left the ministry, left faith itself. And eventually, I found a home in humanism. Now, as I was discovering and rediscovering my humanism, I very quickly realized that a merely philosophical brand of humanism wasn't going to cut it. And oftentimes, for a lot of folks, the more philosophical type of humanism is the only type of humanism we really know of. Wait, is there something beyond lectures and debate and cognitive exercises? Can it go deeper? And so I began exploring, now nearly a decade ago, what does it look like to live out our humanism more deeply? To put the emphasis to, yes, we need the philosophy. Yes, the debate can be helpful. Yes, the lectures, incredibly expansive. We need those things. But what does it look like to step beyond it? What does it look like to step even beyond a humanist life stance? Maybe we've heard of that term. Oftentimes humanism is thought of, posited to be a life stance or your outlook on the world around us. But no, stepping even beyond that and saying, what is life, what does the humanist lifestyle look like? What does it look like to live humanist? And pressing into that space. Along the way, yes, I met up with the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of congregational humanism, or if we're used to hearing the phrase religious humanism, that's been rebranded because religion so often in today's use of the word, religion oftentimes is conflated with theism, but historically that's not at all the case. You can be an atheist and be religious. But either way, we've just done away with that terminology. Now, instead of calling it religious humanism, we call it congregational humanism. That speaks a little more using words that might not be so difficult or triggering or whatnot. But there at FUS, the birthplace of congregational humanism, a community, humanist community of 200-300 humanists based in Minneapolis. There we're able to kind of push on some of these about decolonizing humanism and a variety of these different concepts that we're working on with our social justice director and that team there. Really cool stuff. There I have the pleasure of serving on the board, and once in a while they let me teach and things like that. But it was about a year ago when another humanist community here in the States reached out to me, and they said, Drew, we'd like to know if you'd be interested in coming, sharing some time with us. And we're wondering if, in particular, you would be willing to speak on this topic. And they posited a topic. They said, would you be willing to come and speak to us about how humanism saves the world? And at first I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. You know, I'm seeing it in great big red and yellow comic book superhero font, how humanism saves the world, right? And I'm like, wow, this sounds amazing. I can't wait to hear this talk. But then my second thought, the more sober-minded thought was, I'm not sure anything can save the world at this point. Can anything save the world at this point? I mean, the planet burning down around us, humanity, I mean, is that savable? I don't know. Can humanism save the world? But then my third thought was this. if anything can save the world. Because I have seen some promising studies and technologies and things like that over the last few years, so maybe it is possible. But my third thought then was, if anything can save the world, this I believe, and this I do think to be true. If anything can save the world, I really do think it starts with, is founded upon, and driven by humanist values. And so we want to think and talk a little bit about what might that look like. Specifically, the development of our values, the integration of our humanist values into our lives, in both individually and collectively in community. What might this look like, and where might we go from there? So today, 3 things I would like to do here as we share these next moments together. First of all, to maybe press on us a little bit, but nothing too stressful, I promise, okay? But a little bit of an exercise together, all right? Thinking through this. It's not really going to be interactive. It's more an exercise for each of us to consider individually in this collective space. So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise in considering what might our individual humanist values be as we think through it. Then secondly, we want to take those values and begin considering what it might look like to then implement those values and apply them to our lives, to our lifestyles as we upgrade our humanism, if you will. And then thirdly, we want to mix in a little bit of that secret sauce called community. And that's where we want to go from here. Sound good? Yeah? Are we along for the ride? Yeah? All right, well, let's get into it, okay? So first of all, just taking some time to identify our values. What does that look like? What does that mean? What are we even talking about when we talk about humanist values? It might almost sound like family values, like kind of like the opposite kind of. Values could maybe be a triggering word. We talk about core values. It might even sound a little too corporate. So we're trying to steer away from that. But what are the essential concepts? The essential core. Ideas, principles, themes that we would do well to build our lives upon, to serve as the foundation upon which we want to build our lives. Now, the cool thing about humanism is there's no credo, there's no doctrine or dogma, no mandated statements of any kind. Humanism, in a sense, is simply humans working together to build a better world, to live out a better, healthier humanity. That's our humanism. It's humans helping other humans, right? I get asked a fair amount. Humanists like to really fixate on what the definition of humanism is, but kind of the cool thing is, since it's not mandated from above, it's kind of, there's this eye of the beholder kind of component to it. But how I define humanism, what I think resonates well, at least for me, and helps us get more on that lifestyle track, is thinking of humanism as a lifestyle that firstly seeks to embrace my own humanity, proverbial warts and all. What does it mean to live in this body? What does it look like to destigmatize things about my body? Right? And so there's huge movements out of our humanist community in Minneapolis about embracing our sexuality, embracing our bodies, embracing our physicality. And what does it look like? What does it mean to be human? First of all, to embrace that is humanist. But then also to then gather and celebrate the wonder of our collected humanness, right? To celebrate the wonder of our sharedness. And then finally, it's a lifestyle that seeks to work together with other humans to build and maintain human-based solutions to human problems. In other words, not God-based or faith-based, but human-based solutions to human problems. It's inherently, in other words, human-centered. It's humanist, humanism, right? But it's not always easy being in charge of our own selves, right? So there's nothing else lording over us, so we're each in charge of our own selves. But it's not so easy being in charge of ourselves, because that means we got to make decisions. It means we're held responsible for how we live and what we do, rather than just being able to relegate it to some other thing or being, right? reminds me of a favorite donut shop of mine from back when I was living in Chicago full time, again, up until 5 years ago. I was here for about 20 years, and a little over. But so it reminds me of a favorite donut shop of mine back when I was here in the city. It was a donut shop that I stopped in regularly. Anytime I was hosting a morning event, I would stop in on the way to the event, pick up a couple dozen of the same order. It was always assorted with extra chocolate. Assorted because, well, it helped appeal to the wide variety of the masses, but there were always a few too many jellies left at the end. So eventually I amended it to assorted with extra chocolate because, well, it's extra chocolate, right? And it was the perfect order every single time. But then life went on, and kind of the space I was working in shifted and moved on a little bit. But then it was several years before I made it back to that donut shop. But then when I did, I was back in the area hosting another event. Went back to that donut shop, walked in, waited in line, went up to the counter and said, yes, I'd like however many dozen of assorted with extra chocolate. And the person behind the counter, they said, okay, sure. Now, what would you like with that? And I said, assorted with extra chocolate. And they said, right, but what would you like in the assorted with extra chocolate? And I said, well, just the standard assorted, however you wonderfully create it each time. I mean, I don't remember, it's yours, but however you do it, your standard assorted, but a few less jellies, a few extra chocolates. And they said, no, let me explain this to you, they said. There's no standard assorted anymore, apparently. There's no standard assorted. We need you to tell us which one you want. And they said, let me help you out. What's one that you would like in here? And I was a little taken aback. I had a little bit of decision paralysis, and I was like, oh man, I gotta decide the whole thing. Well, I don't know. Was there a bear claw? Was there Bavarian creams? I was a little stunned for a moment. Wait a minute. You mean I have to put this whole thing together myself? You mean if I mess it up, it's on me because I got too many damn jellies, okay? But then I pulled myself together and I went from there. So the fact that humanism is, the fact that there's no creed to humanism can be incredibly freeing. But it also puts the onus on us. Puts the onus on us to build our lives in a responsible manner. Gone are the days of pointing to an ancient book and saying, I guess I just believe whatever it says I should believe, or I guess I just value whatever it says I should value, or whatever my pastor says that I should value. No, it's incredibly freeing to be able to build our own lives on our own terms, but that means we have to take responsibility for it as well in a way that maybe we didn't feel we had to before, for those of us who are post-faith or formerly religious or formerly theistic, okay? So what is it that we value? What is it that we, as a group, as a movement, as a community, value? What is it that you value? And that's kind of why this becomes, in a sense, an individual exercise, because it doesn't always help, although there is a place for the society to say these are our core values, but what are yours? What do we, each of us individually, build our lives upon as we live humanist? And so what I'd invite you to do over these next few moments is a little bit of an exercise. Some of us may want to pull out some good old paper and pencil if that's your thing, or maybe you pull out your phone and you make a note in your phone, or maybe you simply sit back and take cognitive note of what your values are. But I would invite us over these next few minutes to really kind of think through, to start the process, if we haven't already, of thinking through, what are my 5 or 6 or 7 kind of values that resonate with me, that I vibe with? What might that look like? And we don't expect you to come away with this polished set today, but to begin that process of saying, what are the things that I find most important that I would like to intentionally build my life upon? What would I like to serve as the framework upon which I want to build my humanism? So I'm going to take a couple minutes here. I'm going to put up, this is a set that probably is familiar to some of us at least. Anybody seen this before? Yeah, a few of us, right? A number of us. So this is an attempt by the American Humanist Association to put together and construct sort of the 10 key core values, if you will, of humanism, of what that looks like. And so I'm going to walk through this for a moment. By the way, yes, you might notice that 10 commitments kind of mirrors 10 commandments, and for some of us that can be a bit triggering, and I feel that. But try and push past that and just look at what the concepts are, because I think this can be really helpful. I'm going to just walk through these for a moment, okay? I'll just read them. I'm not going to make much comment on them. But listen to what might resonate most with you as we walk through this. What might make it to your top tier values that you want to build your life upon? So just quickly walking through these, and then I do get asked on occasion, got asked quite a bit initially, well, Drew, what are your core values? And so I'll share my list with you as well in case that's helpful, okay? No problem. Don't worry, okay? Eyes go and no, you're fine, okay? Do your thing. But yes, so walk through these a little bit here and just listen for them. I see some of us closing our eyes. If that helps, absolutely. But so just walking through these. So one, ethical development. What does it mean to develop an ethical lifestyle? Maybe that's part of what I want to drive me as I build out my life. Then we have peace and social justice, okay? The work of social justice. We have service and participation, rolling up our sleeves, getting our hands dirty, and helping with the construction, okay? Service and participation, serving as well, helping, altruism, okay? In other words, helping without expectation of getting anything in return. Humility, a little good humanist humility. Environmentalism, all right? Something that's probably talked about quite a bit in this room, okay? Environmentalism, and how do we help save this burning planet? Global awareness, realizing that it's not just us. There's a whole world of other perspectives and other experiences, right? Then it's responsibility, taking ownership for myself and maybe parts of the world around me. We've got empathy, right? Empathy, feeling those next to me. And then finally, critical thinking. I always like to read that one last because I think for a number of us, oftentimes, critical thinking is sort of our entry point into humanism. And oftentimes, our humanism stops there, right? More of a philosophical humanism. It's critical thinking. And that can kind of almost become the end-all, be-all sometimes of our humanism. And as you can see here, by no means is that the case. So much more. So much more, okay? So what's yours? Feel free to dig down deeper into some of this, right? So for some of us, social justice, yes, but maybe we dig deeper into racial justice or could be reproductive rights or trans rights. Or maybe we dig in a whole different direction. Maybe it's veganism. Maybe it's sentientism, right? This whole idea of if humanism is advocating for all other humans, then sentientism is this idea of advocating for all other sentient beings, not just the humans in the room. Okay, what's yours? Maybe it's bridge building. Maybe it's interfaith work. I know a lot of our humanist communities are interested in building bridges and working interfaith with other progressive theists where we share the same values and maybe exactly what they believe doesn't matter as much sometimes. What's your value? So here's an example of mine, okay? And so here you can see where we're also, as we're digging into lifestyle, how we want to build our daily lives, it can go beyond just impact issues, right? So for mine, since I get asked about it a lot, mine, community, clear communication is a value for me. Speaking clearly, communicating clearly. Playfulness and laughter, because y'all, if we're not having fun, what the hell's the point, okay? Empathy. Transparency, autonomy, right? A lot of these, there's some overlap from the previous slide. But then creativity and wonder. Creating a sense of awe and just building things, okay? My day job centers on numbers. I need a creative outlet, all right? And then values alignment. For me, doing this kind of thing is part of how I work out my core values, my core value of values alignment, helping others build a more aligned lifestyle. What's yours? How do you want to build your life? Once we have done the work or begin the process of thinking through what might be my top values, concept, principles that I want to build the framework of my life around, then we step into this idea with this work of values alignment of saying, okay, where am I currently living and how do I get there? It's this whole idea of upgrading our humanism, okay? And that's what we start to do next. It's this idea of asking this question. Our goal in sort of this part, if you will, is to say, how do I take a good close look and identify where am I living right now? What does my lifestyle look like? Are there any of those values that we're thinking through is among my top tier that I maybe are a little bit out of alignment or out of sync with how I actually live? If one of my values is a little good humanist humility, and yet I find myself constantly acting like an asshole under stress, well, then maybe that's something I can take practical steps in working to bring my lived values into greater alignment with my aspired values and bringing that alignment right there. Now, if we found ourselves right now today in the midst of a multi-session series of workshops, there would be a number of different exercises and group activities and individual activities and things that we would do to try and take those aspired values we just articulated and to think how we might apply them to various facets and areas of our lives, such as relationships, such as my employment. How do I apply my values at work, in my work setting, and with my coworkers, with my employees, with my employers? How might I do that? How might I apply my values to my home life? If I'm partnered or if I have anyone I share a home with, right? Cohabitating. How do I apply my values to my friendships? How do I apply my values to myself? In other words, if part of our goal is to treat humans better, it's so easy to overlook this human right here, your own human, yourself. In a lot of ways, living out our humanism begins with how do I treat myself? How much care do I extend to myself? And so we have a whole workshop session just devoted to how do we step away. For some of us, a lot of humanism kind of carries with it this old Protestant Christian baggage of this feeling that I have to sacrifice all of my desires and preferences in order to save the world spiritually that time, right? We're known, we still sometimes feel in our humanism that we got to work ourselves to an early grave in order to try and bring a little sanity to the world. Well, that's not treating at least one human very humanistically. How do we treat it to ourselves? When I was a minister, I would often say, look at how a person lives their lives and you'll see what their true values are. Now, I think you can push that a little too far, okay? Just because it might not be very lived out right now doesn't necessarily mean that it's not there at all, right? It can still be percolating, pop, 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 underneath the surface, right? So the question is, though, how do we grow this seed of a value within us and say, I like that, I want to live that way? How do we start actually living that out? And so today we're just asking some questions. We're throwing out some concepts for us to do that multi-session work on ourselves and expanding beyond here. What might that look like? I have often said, I would dare suggest, that a humanism that stays in the head really isn't all that humanist. Now, again, I step beyond the more philosophical side of humanism, and again, we need humanism of the head, but a humanism that stays in the head, I would dare suggest, really isn't all that humanist. That a deeper humanism, a lived humanism, an embodied humanism must extend beyond the head, filter its way down into the heart, where it does a bunch of fuzzy, fluffy stuff in there, and then extends out to our hands, if you will. And I say that symbolic, it's more symbolism than anything else, right? But according to our abilities, handed or not, extending out into the way we live and interact with the world around us. So how do we do that? What steps can I take to live more authentically humanist? I think sometimes I've seen, as I've talked with folks and worked with different folks, is that oftentimes it can be helpful to distinguish between what I like to call an impact humanism and an everyday humanism. So what we mean by that, so our impact humanism, that's what maybe we oftentimes think of when we think of humanism. It's what are we doing in the world? How are we building a better world? How are we building a better humanity? It's our impact around us. It's the ripple effects. It's boom, 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 right? Impact humanism. It's a lot of those issues that we saw in the American Humanist Association, the 10 Commitments. A lot of those values that we saw, and they're centered on the impact we're making. That's great. But then let's also bring in, when we're talking about our everyday humanism, that's the side of our humanism where it's taking our impact into our everyday lives. What does my humanism, how do my humanist values make their way into those relationships that I mentioned earlier? How does my everyday humanism interact and lead me to interact with the server in the restaurant or the customer service rep on the 1-800 number, right? When I'm missing my service and what's going on and who's going to fix this thing, right? How are my humanist values driving that? How are my humanist values driving how I might treat my team and my employees or my partner or my kids or my friends or however? How does my humanism lead in that as well? So it can be helpful for us to think along these two lines of how is my impact humanism transformed and how is my everyday humanism informed? And how do they impact and affect one another? How do they speak to one another? Okay, because sometimes you'll see, right? You'll have orgs, and we hear about them in the news and things like that, whether they call themselves humanist or not. You've got groups in charities, nonprofits, all this stuff where it might be all about breaking down systemic injustice, right? Doing real good work in the world. Social media all teed up as well, saying all the right things, but then you go back behind the scenes, and headquarters is a mess. An absolute disaster. Okay? How do we bring our impact humanism into the everyday of how we live our lives? So, I've got a twofold challenge. The EHS challenge for the months ahead, okay? As we have different speakers come in, yes, different speakers that you have come in, whatever the speakers want you to get out of their talk, get out of that talk, absolutely. But I'd also encourage you to look for ways where you can enter into each talk asking two questions, looking for two takeaways. One, whatever's in this talk, and lots of good, and some of it's going to be a bit academic, and that's great, philosophical, that's great, focused on very specific, important, vital issues for the city and beyond, that's great. Ask yourself two questions, though. What from this talk can I take away and use it to further upbuild or upgrade my impact humanism? And what's one thing I can take from here to further inform my everyday humanism? Those two things. What can I take from this talk to impact and empower my impact humanism? What can I take from this talk to inform my everyday humanism? How do I live more humanist as a result of this talk? So once we've done these two things, we've looked at our values, we're considering what might my core values, my core humanist values be, we're thinking through how might we apply them, and again, we didn't go through a bunch of steps on that, but just thinking through different things for us to do some of that work on our own, and thinking through how do I live more humanist, how do I take the values I hold and apply them more fully to my daily life. Then what we want to do, we want to take a step back. Especially with this new season you're entering into and building your community, is we want to say, how do we mix in that secret sauce? That secret sauce, that power of humanism that we call community. What does that look like? There's this iconic scene in about halfway through the first Avengers movie. You know, the slightly popular superhero comic book franchise maybe we've heard of before. And about halfway through that first Avengers movie, or really it's the sixth in the entire 50 movie series. But so about halfway through, now if we're so over the whole Marvel thing and our eyes are starting to glaze over, I apologize, okay? But hang with me, because I think this can be kind of cool, all right? There's this scene about halfway through that critics tell us is the foundational scene that sets itself up for so much more success than what the other comic book universe found, okay? It sets it apart. It makes it something totally different and something that wasn't anticipated initially. It's this room where it's on the big, for those of us who are familiar with the film, it's in this big airship overlooking Earth about halfway through that first Avengers movie. And they're in this big white room, and it's this space where for the very first time, all of the heroes are meeting one another for the very first time. So you've got Thor and Captain America and Iron Man and the Hulk, and they're all here in this space for the very first time meeting one another, and they all come with their own agendas. They come with their own missions. They come with their own list of priorities. They come with their own preferences. They come with their own tried and true proven way of getting things done. And they come and they gather together, and as they do, guess what happens? They conflict with one another rather explosively. They literally fight one another right there in that room, okay? But in that room, they also learn how to work together. In that room, they take a step back after a few moments of fighting. They take a step back, and they take a moment to consider where everyone else is coming from, and consider everyone else's strengths and abilities, and consider how they might work together to accomplish more and achieve more success against their larger threat than they could have ever hoped to have done individually on their own. So what I'd encourage us to do, what I'd like us to do, and no need to say anything, just look around the room, and for those of us online, look through the chat maybe, okay? But take a moment. I'd encourage you, according to your abilities, pivot in your chair and literally look around. If staring people in the eyes is a little intimidating, you don't got to look anybody in the eye. But literally, I'd encourage you to pivot in your chair as you're able. Look around this space and look around. Just silently, no need to say anything, but look around and do that for a moment. Keep doing that for a moment, okay? This is your community. This is your folk. These are your people, or at least they can be if you let them, okay? And I want us to consider the fact, as we're continuing to look around and scrolling through the chat, etc., I want us to consider that in this room there's a number of preferences, desires. There's a number of different missions. We each come with our own mission, with our own way of doing things, with our own sets of values that maybe conflict with some other sets of values in this room, right? Our own hobby horses and passions, and this is the work we got to get done. This is the most important issue, but it's a little different than my most important issue, and we're all here. We have our own agendas and our own strengths and our own skills, but we share this thing called community. And I'd like us to consider what it might look like in the weeks and months ahead for us to be more intentional about doing the work of living life together and of being more intentional with our values shared and individualized. What does it look like to live that out? Humanist values are really easy when it's just me doing my thing. We're all pretty great humanists until another human enters the room, okay? But it's in community that our impact humanism grows more powerful, and it's in community that our everyday humanism becomes more enjoyable, more connected, more valuable, the more we're connected with others in that shared community. at First Unitarian Society, Minneapolis, again, the humanist community of a few hundred humanists centered in Minneapolis. There we have this incredible team led by a couple incredible humans named Anita Martinez and Kathleen Quinn. And they lead a team called Active Voices. And what they do is they do this incredible work in empowering the rest of us to efficiently have greater impact on the legislation in Minnesota, okay? What they do is Active Voices, each week they put together a set of postcards, sets of postcards, according to what district you're in, what part of the city and state that you're in. They put together these postcards, and on them it has a little note, a little encouragement, if you will, for our elected officials, okay? For our elected officials, both on local levels as well as state levels, congresspersons and senators, as well as governor, and then also on the national level. And they put these together. And then what we do, it's really easy for the rest of us. We just go up to the Active Voices table, or we go online and we download the cards, and we sign off, and we write our zip code, and we hand it back to them, and then they take it and they send it out into the world. Here's one example of that. I brought some with me. So this one says, and it's one that we used maybe a year or so ago. It says, ban military weaponry. And then it goes on to say, Congress must reinstate the assault weapons ban immediately. It worked in the past and it can work again. We need common sense, impactful action to tackle gun violence. Most Americans agree civilians do not need military-grade weaponry. Sign, zip code, hand it back to them. One of our Minnesota state-level senators actually held up a stack of these from the Senate floor in Minnesota, held it up, read it to everyone, and said, "This is what your people want. Vote accordingly." We may be aware that in the last year or so, exactly however long it's been, Minnesota has become just this bastion in many ways of progressive values in our legislation. It's become this safe haven for reproductive rights, a safe haven for trans rights and trans safety. And a lot of that, I'd like to think, comes from dozens, if not a couple hundred, of these postcards being mailed in every single week. We've got your humanists working to do what we can to build a better world, right? But that comes in community, because how many of us are going to go through the work and do it ourselves? How many times have we been told, write your senator, write your congressperson, and we go home and we don't? We mean to, but we forget. But in community, all it takes is 5 people to say, let us empower you in this. And now we've got dozens or hundreds of these postcards going out every single week, helping build a better world as we live out a better humanity. Our humanism and its impact knows no bounds when we're bounded in community. So how do we save the world? Do we save the world? Can we save the world? I don't know, but this I'm confident of. I love these words I'd like to share with you here from Dr. J. Exodus Hooper, who is a bit of a leader on the rise within humanist circles, okay? And Dr. J. Exodus Hooper, within all of their work in all these different areas across the country, they're also an associate minister of ours at FUS. Sorry if the word minister is a bit triggering. We still use it in the best of atheistic senses in our humanist community. But so Dr. J is one of our ministers in Minneapolis, and in a public Q&A from a few years ago that was published, they were asked this question. They were asked, how do you go about deciding what partnerships to make as you do your humanist work? And Dr. J, they said this. They said, when we take a stab at trying to make change, I don't know that I'm necessarily always interested in like-minded folk as much as I'm interested in like-hearted folk. Now I'm going to read that again because I don't want us to hear, oh, it doesn't matter if we agree cognitively. No, that's not what they're saying. I'm going to read it again. When we take a stab at trying to make change, I don't know that I'm necessarily always as interested in like-minded folk as much as I'm interested in like-hearted folk. In other words, it's one thing for us to agree cognitively, and that can be important, but it's a whole other level for us to agree in heartedness, for us to agree in lifestyle, for us to agree in embodied values. So as we go on from here and as we step into this whole season ahead of us, and as we ask those questions of how can I take this and apply it to my impact humanism? How can I take this and apply it to my everyday humanism? How do I live a more humanist life? What does that look like in my day in and in my day out? As we do that, let's do it together. Let's do it together. Because as we're doing that, if we do that, today and every day as we move forward, working to build a humanism that is deeper, that is more honest, that is more vibrant, that is more intentional. If we do that, then maybe, just maybe we really can save the world. Thank you. Let's see. I don't know. What do you want me to do? Just leave it here? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much. That is a speech that energized me more than coffee, so I appreciate that. In just a moment, we will have a brief musical interlude for those of you in our audience to think of questions, and for those of you watching online to type them in the chat. We also invite you to consider donating to the Ethical Humanist Society, whether with the QR code that's in person here. I believe it might be posted. It's in the back for sure. There's also a basket for cash donations if you're old school, if you feel like it. Or there will be a link in the chat shortly. We suggest a $5 donation, but anything you're able to give will help us continue to put on engaging talks, as well as other community events and programs all year round. And with that, please enjoy the musical interlude. All right, I think we're ready to start the Q&A portion. So how it'll work is for those that are online, put your questions in the chat. I'll get them through the magic of living in the future, and I'll be able to read them over here at the microphone, which those of us who are in the audience here today are able to step up and ask questions to Drew. So Drew, please come on back up, and then we'll have probably about 20 minutes for some Q&A, I think.
Cool. Well, it really was an absolute pleasure, still is an absolute pleasure to be with you all. So thank you for having me. And yeah, anything we want to talk about, so whether if it's something that's not even really or only distantly related to what I actually said words about, feel free, okay? Anything you want to ask about is fine by me.
Drew, great talk. Fantastic, as always. My question about sort of the point about the minister and the term.
Yeah.
One of the things we struggle with, I think, is when people come here and they look for a place that isn't sort of the thing that they'd expect from a church-like environment, they want to get rid of all of it. Like, just get all of it out of here, because that's the problem, is the building and the place and the people, like the structure and the ritual. How do you approach that, and how do you help guide people in sort of, well, maybe there are pieces of that that are human, that are inherently human. How do you handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so first of all, it's a fantastic question, and it's one, that bigger question, which I'm taking it to be beyond simply the use of the term minister itself, but right, just bigger than that in terms of church-like feeling, things that feel like our previous church experiences or other religious types of experiences. How do we pick or choose what we use and what we don't, or how it feels, or do we sing? Do we do congregational singing and things like that? So it really is going to vary community by community. There's no right or wrong answer to it. It does involve a couple things that are important, though. One is being mindful of things that might be triggering, if we can use that word, for folks in our community. So if we're hearing maybe regularly that we're hearing how, every time you use the word minister, or every time we also use the word reverend, that one, ooh, yeah. Every time you say, use the term reverend before the minister director gets up for our non-theistic gatherings, and by the way, and there's no prayers, there's no use of God talk, there's none of that. But it's fully non-theistic, but there's this reverend and minister sort of thing. We're not a church, we're a society, just like you all. But yeah, so one is, if we're hearing things that are triggering, that's one thing to consider. But again, that's going to be different for different folks, right? And by triggering, when I say that, maybe that's a little bit of a shorthanded term that we might not all be on the same pages. If somebody, every time they hear a particular word or see us doing or participating in a particular action or activity or secular ritual or whatever it may be, if it's something where it's like they have flashbacks to their former experiences with different facets of religion, and it can be something that almost gives them like they seize up by it, right? I mean, it's difficult, it's psychological, can be heavy, can be tough, right? But that's where it does depend community by community and person by person. So for instance, I know of one non-theistic minister where they don't use the word hope. For this particular non-theistic minister, the word hope is triggering. It's filled with all this Christian-ish feelings and theology, so they don't like the word hope, and they don't use the word hope in their gatherings. For me, hope isn't triggering at all. I don't even really see the connection. But for me, minister and reverend is kind of I personally don't care for using the terms minister or reverend, but in our community, it's kind of a throwback to how it was, literally a non-theistic religious movement or religious congregation. But that ties in with the second thing I keep in mind is it's more than just ourselves, right? So it's something in community. So for me, I'd prefer we don't use the term minister or reverend, but others do. It's part of the community's history. So I'm not going to argue over it. Sure, let's do it. Nobody else seems to have a problem, or at least it's not a big one. So, but it's very individualized, community to community. It's something to have a dialogue over. Is that helpful? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yes, hello.
Hello. Tell me, what do you think that a humanist community offers in a very progressive, blue-leaning, non-religious community otherwise, like where we all live? And people are very engaged and involved in PTA and government and political action. So they have a lot of different communities that they belong to, and they don't feel oppressed by traditional organized religion. What does a humanist community offer that those other engagements don't?
Yeah, great question. Again, so with the part of the trick, part of the difficulty, the task for us is to try and step away from feeling like we should have something to offer everyone. Everyone should want to come here. Everyone who is a humanist should want to be a part of this, okay? That stems from or can stem from some of this back-built behavior, culture, pressures of this evangelistic mindset that religion oftentimes, but not always, has, where we have to spread the word and we got to get people to come and join us, okay? That said, that doesn't mean we can't spread the word or want people to join us, but feeling a compulsion where we have to can be difficult, can be tricky, can be in a way lightly dangerous, okay? But what do we have to offer? So one thing that your group distinctly offers is a congregational format. So those who are looking for, and oftentimes what I've seen in various humanist congregations specifically, as opposed to, because there's lots of different forms of community, there's lots of different forms of humanist community, okay? Just came from this humanist conference in Ontario a couple weeks ago, okay? So that conferences are a type of community as well, right? Meeting with my humanist friends for happy hour is a type of community. Going and maybe if you've got this group of folks who's always doing activist work, okay, and we're always gathering together for our activist work, that can form a sense of community. So there's all these different types of humanist community, and beyond that, there's even more different types of humanist work, humanist organizations, right, charitable efforts. One subset within that is humanist congregations. And with humanist congregations, oftentimes, though not always, I suppose you'd say probably it tends to be two types of folks are in or drawn to humanist congregations. One, those of us who may have grown up in humanist congregations. So we grew up within the society, so it feels natural to us to be here. But then the other one tends to be those of us who grew up in a Christian church setting or some other type of, oftentimes it's Protestant Christian church settings, where then we've left the faith, but we still yearn for something that feels churchy. Because that's the other thing. No matter how much we pull away some of the words, this is still going to feel churchy. The fact that it's Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. feels churchy, okay? Which is maybe then where maybe most folks who are drawn to that churchiness maybe aren't triggered by terms like minister and reverend, because they are looking for a non-theistic type of that anyway, right? But we have a lot of folks in Minneapolis where they come in, or they're part of other humanist groups in Minneapolis, because there's a number of them, just like here, where they even use our building on occasion, right? Other humanist groups. And just walking into the building, they're like, this feels so churchy. I don't know that I could never come on a Sunday morning. That's okay. You don't have to. There's lots of other groups that do, right? So looking for, who is it that's looking for church, but not church, not the theism, right? That's what this is. Trying to make it something that it's not probably isn't going to go very far, because at the end of the day, it's still going to feel like church. But humanism has many different layers, right? So you can practice your humanism by supporting other non-explicitly humanist organizations and charitable efforts and things like that, right? So it's a layered humanism. There is no and will never be one organization that meets and services all areas of humanism and all impact issues. And so one other thing that might be helpful as we build this community forward is to steer away from the idea that we need to be the end-all be-all of our people's humanism. It never will be. So look for how can we build partnerships, or how can we have references, right? Resources sheets available for, hey, I want to get involved in this work. This is important work for us to do. Great, well, we can't do everything. And so we can go back to, well, okay, if you bring up the idea, you're the next leader for it, we can bring that up. That's a tough sell, okay? But that's great. You know what? We have 3 of us who are also involved in that, and the 3 of us go and join with this other larger group once a month to volunteer. That's a great way to do it. It's using the resources around you. It's building those relationships and those partnerships, and it's further equipping your people for a more multifaceted humanism that doesn't so tax you in your own physicality where you can't possibly keep up and you get burned out because we're trying to do everything for everybody. Is that helpful? Yeah.
All right, a question from our online audience. It's a little long. Do you have a way to periodically have your community engage in the question of perpetuating the use of the old churchy words that may be alienating? The selection effect may lead to conservatism. No, and by that, the questioner means those who don't mind the word stay, and those who do find them worrisome don't stay, so that the words keep staying and it's hard to grow or innovate in that.
Yeah, great question. So I think through all that, if I'm gathering it right, is maybe a way to phrase it is, how do we know people really aren't bothered or triggered by the words? They just leave, right? And so that's going to happen with any org, right? And so it comes down to that conversation of what words do we feel fit? What words do we take out, even if we've always been a non-theistic community and word is part of our heritage and people don't seem triggered by it, or maybe we say, you know what, this is coming up often enough, or just maybe current leadership, the board, the current directors, etc. Maybe they just are like, you know what, I think we need to make a move even if people are comfortable with it. So there's no right or wrong answer there, but you're right. There are going to be people there will continually and always be people who come in that don't like what's being made available and they leave. That's always going to be something, okay? And so ultimately you have to go with, well, what fits our people, our group, right? And how do we confidently build this community with what we have? Because we can't be everything to everyone, right? But yeah, so ultimately you got to make the call. But yeah, I mean, people will come in Minneapolis, people will come in and be like, whoa, there's way too much congregational singing in this humanist community. I can't, I need to leave. But then there'll also be people coming in this space being like, well, I'm looking for like atheist church and they don't even sing here, so I'm going to leave. Either way, people are going to leave, right? So ultimately you just got to pick what fits our identity and go with that. Yes.
I feel like I'm able to express my smaller personal values and just my day-to-day life, but I found myself not having the time to work on what I'm now seeing as impact humanism. Like, for example, there's this environmental club that I want to join, but I don't think I'm able to. And how am I able to still express those and work on my larger impact values without being able to be with people who also share those values?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said something specific. Was it an environmental group? Is that what you said? Yeah. So, but if I'm understanding correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you would like to be involved in that, but it's a time issue, right? There's just too much commitment. You don't have time for it. Is that accurate? Yeah. Okay. So now, I mean, that's a huge common thing, right? I mean, in a sense, on the pinwheel, those 10 commitments, right? Every one of them are values of mine. I can't do them all. So how do I pick and choose? And maybe with work and school and other responsibilities and commitments, maybe we don't have much time at all for what we consider our impact humanism, right? So from there, let's take a bigger step back and say, maybe I don't have the bandwidth to join a weekly group or even a monthly group, right? Well, is there something I can do once a year? Maybe it means it needs to be a different group. Maybe that means it's not this group. They require it to be weekly, right? But maybe there's something else I can do. Maybe if there's certain type of activism we're interested in. We're like, you know what? I've always wanted to be an activist, but I've never actually activated my activism. What do I do? What's a good first step? A good first step can be, you know what? Let's sometime over these in the next 6 weeks, I commit to finding an upcoming protest that I want to join. And I'm just the simple step of just finding one, okay? And then I commit to, in the next 6 months, I'm just going to take one afternoon to go to one protest. And that's my thing. So maybe I can't do a weekly commitment of whatever it may be. In environmentalism, I can't do a weekly commitment, but maybe there's one thing I can do, one activity that gives me the ability, over the course of an entire year to just do a little bit, a couple hours. So you're just breaking it down into smaller portions, a smaller commitment. It could, and if even that is tough to do, which for some of us, even that would be tough, one afternoon in an entire year, then maybe it's, sometimes we'll hear like, listen, we're good at posting stuff on social media, but if that's all we ever do, then is that enough? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe if we're in a really tough situation where literally the only thing we have time for is posting something on social media, that in a way, in its own way, can have an impact. For some of us, that's all we can do. So just looking for little things. What's the bite size that's bite size enough for me to do? And then confidently do it. The more we step away from feeling like we're not doing enough, the more helpful and healthy that can be. Okay, now we also need to be real. Could I be doing more? And I'm not doing anywhere close to what I could be. Well, that's a very real question. But also I'm honestly doing about all I can right now while also maintaining a healthy mindset and practicing self-care. And that looks different for each of us, right? And so some of us, our bandwidth is a lot different than other people's bandwidths. And sometimes it's not helped when we see other people out there, it looks like they literally are saving the whole damn world. Meanwhile, I'm just trying to hold myself together and get through another day. Okay? Then I have to work to not feel bad about my humanist priority having to be holding myself together to get through another day, while maybe finding one activity a year to do this one passion of mine. And maybe one day I'll be in a position where I can do more. But for today, this is enough, and that's okay. Is that helpful? Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this is a follow-up to the question online, and after this one, we might have time for one more question after that, just to warn everybody. But from online, to follow up, so why do you personally know you want to be part of a community committed to language you find uncomfortable?
Say that again. What do you do if you...
So why, I think it was more pointed to you, like,
Yeah.
so why do you personally know you want to be part of a community committed to language that you find uncomfortable?
Oh, and that's a follow-up question to the minister reverend thing?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and here's where it's individualized. All of this is individualized. To me, whether or not we call our director a minister, whether or not they, at the end of their ordination, which there are such a things as humanist ordination in case we're not aware. So most humanist groupings, larger groupings, have an ordination process for their directors, okay? And in some circles that's followed up with, you are then called reverend, okay? Whether we use the term reverend or minister, honestly, for me, I really don't care. I mean, I find it kind of funny. My preference would be we don't use it. But ultimately, there's so much more important things we're doing. We're building community, and community is back and forth. I cannot have my own way in everything, let me rephrase that, okay? I'm going to press maybe on some of us, I don't know. If I'm trying to be a part of community while insisting that everything is my way, then I am not interested in being a part of community. community is not my interest if that's what I'm doing. Humanism is not a dictatorship by anyone, okay? And if you think it is, then maybe you're just not humanist, okay? Yeah, and as a community, we need to be able to confidently say those things. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take the liberty to ask the last question then. Drew, for an example of the, thinking about impact and everyday humanism in places where we're not explicitly talking about humanism, what's an instance you had where that kind of resonated with you very fully that you could explain to us, where you were doing something that wasn't related to your humanist work, but you found yourself pushed in a way thinking about your impact humanism and your everyday humanism by it?
Okay, so something where, let me make sure I got the question, something where
Sure.
so you said I'm not doing humanist activity, I'm just living my life.
Yeah, and you have an experience that, makes you put both in perspective and maybe change the way you act in either one of those in impact and everyday.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. So a real life example of something where I'm living my everyday life and where I'm hit by this and I say I need to make a change in how I'm doing this. Right?
Yeah, either
Yeah.
compelled, inspired, however it came.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so, all right. So here's one, okay? Here's one. I'm not that big on Sunday morning gatherings. Sorry to say that. And yet I serve on the board for a congregational humanist community where its main gathering is on Sunday mornings, okay? And so first of all, why would I even join on that board? Forget the terminology, the whole gathering is at the wrong time, okay? And maybe this is a little bit different than what you were asking, I don't know, but it's me saying, okay, I want to participate in this community that's going on, and maybe this is way off track since you said it's not an explicitly humanist work, but it's me just building my life saying, okay, I'd rather maybe sleep in once in a while on a Sunday morning, or I have other projects that I'm working on, because I'm working on different projects and all these different, none of this is my day job, okay? And so writing books and speaking and doing, coaching work with all of these are my hobbies, all right? And so there's so much more I could be doing on Sundays. So why would I spend time here on a Sunday, right? Or in my own, so one, I allow myself to not be there every Sunday. I'm there maybe every other. It's been a month since I've been there at all because I've been traveling a lot, okay? But so I'm looking at my life and I'm saying, listen, where can I make some space for this? Because it is important to me. Because this is part of all of this other work that this group is doing is important to me. And so I'm going to make space within my work. And I'm going to make space within my day job, okay? And I'm going to make space with how I live my life every day so that I have time for some of these other commitments. I don't know. Other parts of it is, I suppose something totally different is, I have to stop in. So I'm a single dad. Both of my kids chose to move in with me full time a few years ago, rather than with their mom. They were teenagers. Now they're 20 and 18, almost 19 and 21 now at this point. They both decided to move in with me, and a lot of that came from years of me saying, okay, stop. How do I act more humanist with my kids? How do I respect their autonomy? How do I help them? How do I step beyond me feeling like I have to be the powerful adult in the room and in the conversation? How do I hear them out? How do I support them? And in the end, it just proved to be a much healthier relationship than what it could have otherwise been, right? So it's very real life, everyday things like that. So I guess you got a twofer on that. Maybe the second one was more like what you were actually asking, but yeah, okay.
We got there. It's all good. And I think with that will be our presentation today. So thank you, Drew, so much for coming by.
Thank you so much. I will say real quick, I apologize that I'm going to have to be whisked away here. And so otherwise, I'd normally say, hey, come find me afterward. Let's talk more if you didn't get your question, et cetera. But so though I'm going to be whisked away, I got to fly out to Denver here promptly. But feel free to reach out to me online. My website's trash, so I wouldn't even worry about that so much. Although there is a way to click on a button and then you get to my email that way. So maybe that's more your thing. So that's fine. That's how you can email me, is Google my name and go to the website. Otherwise, though,
I'm on all of the social medias, and I try and do a fairly good job on keeping up on private messages and DMs and all those kinds of things. So certainly feel free to reach out. Sometimes it might take me a little while to respond, but eventually I do. So feel free to reach out to me that way, and we can talk more. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
If you need his Instagram, just catch me at the coffee hour. So, with that, have a great Sunday. Thank you so much for joining us as we opened our Building Humanist Community Season.